Shining, do you think Mom and Dad might have been kidnapped by ninjas? By natural-born derpy.
Shining, do you think Mom and Dad might have been kidnapped by ninjas?
Twilight asked her brother nervously, her eyes once again scanning the darkened street outside. For the last 15 minutes, all Shining Armor's little sister had done was sit along the living room window and watch as the rain fell from the pitch-black sky, occasionally jolting at the thunderclap of thunder that managed to sound a little too close for her comfort.
You really think Mom and Dad would still be out in this type of weather? Shining asked. Or even ninjas for that matter? I know ninjas are supposed to be all tough and sneaky, but no one likes getting their clothes soaked.
Shining and Twilight's parents had left earlier that afternoon to visit some friends across town. The sudden spooky thunderstorm hadn't been part of their original plan, though. Neither had Twilight's evidently rising unease caused by the whole situation. Twilight ignored Shining's last few words and scurried away from the window, diving headfirst inside of her fortress of knowledge, which was a dozen or so texts stacked in a rough steeple shape with a small opening at its base. It was clear Twilight had already almost outgrown her fortress of knowledge. Her short legs and tail were left hanging out in the breeze with the rest of her safely inside.
Just as I thought!
Twilight announced from deep within her book fort.
It's all so clear now. I really should have seen it coming all along.
Seated on the living room couch, staring at the fireplace, Shining sighed and climbed down. He lifted Twilight's lone roof book up and glanced inside, finding spread out along the carpet a highly detailed map of Canterlot. Twilight had used her crayons to doodle out the route their parents would have taken to get to their friend's house, as well as all the possible spots highly trained ninjas might have been hiding in wait for the perfect opportunity to strike. The moment she had finished her map of possible disasters, Twilight's bottom lip shot out and began to twitch. And then her eyes started watering.
So, if my calculations are correct,
she started off sadly, a lump forming in her throat.
Mom and Dad really were kidnapped by ninjas.
Having known his little sister for years now, Shining knew that full-blown waterworks were only a single wrong word away. As absurd as kidnapped by ninjas clearly was, to most likely anyone that wasn't still a fool, he understood well enough that when Twilight let her mind wander, her imagination could go off the charts in a hurry. In the center of her crumbling fortress of knowledge, a single tear coursed down Twilight's cheek.
What if the ninjas want ransom money? I'm not even old enough to have an allowance yet. How many bits do you have in that piggy bank of yours, Shining? Please say a lot. Please.
The best way to combat a little sister's overactive imagination, Shining thought to himself, by using imagination in turn. I wouldn't worry all that much about Mom and Dad if I were you, Twilight, Shining told her as casually as he could. I'd be more worried about the ninjas, honestly. Twilight looked up at him, tilting her head. She wiped at her eyes with a hoof.
Why? Because I could come here after kidnapping Mom and Dad and kidnap us as well?
Shining shook his head.
Nah, because don't you know how much of a karate master Mom is?
Now Twilight did more than tilt her head, becoming very close to toppling over.
What? Since when? And why wouldn't Mom tell me about something like that?
Waiting until you were older, I would guess, Shining replied, slowly stepping toward the living room window, as if starting some heartfelt monologue or something.
Could now be the right time?
He set a hoof down onto the carpet heavily, only after he had a title in mind that he liked, of course.
Yes, I've decided. Now is the correct time. As an official member of the Band of Breast Brothers, I will tell you exactly what you need to know, Twilight, but only because I think you're old enough to finally learn the truth.
Sluggishly, hesitantly, Twilight left the safety of her fortress of knowledge and crossed the room toward him. She raised a single brow until it disappeared under her mane.
So, Mom's a karate master?
Shining nodded without pause. And you ever wondered where Mom went every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday night?
I thought she had pottery class,
Twilight chirped innocently.
Only a ruse, young filly,
Shining explained.
In truth, all that time was spent in intense karate lessons, perhaps kicking at pottery for practice. So Mom takes karate classes 3 times a week? Takes? Shining laughed to himself. More like teaches. Mom's a karate master, Twilight. She has a black belt and everything. She even had a darker belt than black long ago, but regretfully lost it and was never able to get it back. Did she lose it to a worthy adversary? Another karate master? What? Shining frowned. Oh no, Mom just dropped it in a room with no windows and lost it instantly. Blended right into the shadows it did. Oh.
Twilight sat on the carpet in front of him, head up and expectant. It seemed Shining had finally gathered his little sister's full and, for the moment at least, undivided attention.
So you think she stopped the ninjas from kidnapping her and Dad? But of course, Shining exclaimed, and I'm sure she kicked their butts so bad they ended up with a crack down the middle.
Twilight wrinkled her nose at that.
That sounds like a joke only a dad would make. You can't make those jokes, Shining. You're supposed to have a baby first.
He smirked.
Fine, but just you wait. Once I get the chance, you won't be able to stop the bad jokes from gushing out.
I got a faint smile out of Twilight, and Shining was glad he actually thought he might have averted any further Twilight tears. Then another blast of thunder filled the room they were in, even going so far as to rattle the windows. Just like that, Twilight was safely tucked back inside her fortress of knowledge.
Ah! Now I know for sure what's happened. Those ninjas were just a diversion. See? The real reason Mom and Dad aren't home yet is...
Shining's shoulders slumped as he waited for whatever came next.
Robots!
Twilight yelled as she came out again, a single book tucked under a foreleg.
Why else would a thunderstorm appear out of nowhere on a perfectly perfect day? Pegasi on strike?
Shining ventured dryly.
I have heard grumblings. No! It's much simpler than that. It's to mask the robots' movements. Because it's raining so hard, we can't hear any of their boops or beeps or the sound they make when they back up. You know, the one that goes eh.
She gasped, bringing a hoof up to her mouth.
But Shining, follow me on this. What if they're not just any old regular evil robots, but evil sentient robots instead? So unsatisfied with their dour lives of coffee brewing and baking batches of waffles by the dozens that they collectively decide to rise up and destroy all ponies, including Mom and Dad.
Shining sat on the ground and crossed both forelegs across his chest.
You've been reading those Hey Blackberry books again, haven't you? I thought Mom took those away from you. What? No, I haven't. I haven't read any of those books in, forever. Shut up.
If Twilight's bright crimson cheeks weren't evidence enough, the current book in her grasp certainly was a book titled The Oven That Got a Brain and then didn't want to be an oven anymore because he was always fired up.
Twilight, that's just...
ridiculous, Shining was about to say, but before that he remembered his ongoing battle against Twilight's imagination. He paused to think, but only for a moment.
But Twilight, it's raining outside. So?
She said with rising alarm.
I already told you what that rain is for. It's to cover their tracks. But robots aren't supposed to get wet, remember? Shining said. Their circuits would fry and then they'd explode, and then maybe explode again for some reason.
Twilight's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. She didn't seem to have anything to follow that up with. Until she leveled a tiny hoof in his direction.
But what if they have umbrellas? Big wide ones!
Even Shining had to admit that one stumped him for a moment. Then he smiled smugly.
Well, then I'd just take them away from them. The robots' umbrellas? Yep, Shining said with a nod. Every last one. But that would be so cruel, Shining. Taking someone's umbrella away from them in the middle of a storm. Gah! Even if they were planning on mass pony genocide. This is war, isn't it? Oddly specific robot war, Shining said. To keep my family safe, including my little sister, I would do all that is necessary, up to and including stealing umbrellas from robots that refuse to make us waffles anymore.
The grandfather clock in the kitchen sounded off, indicating it was 6. Shining took one last glance out onto the dreary, wet street outside, hopeful to glimpse his parents' impromptu return, before facing his little sister again.
Time for dinner, Twilight, he told her sternly.
Twilight's jaw hung open.
Eat dinner? Without Mom and Dad? We can't eat dinner without Mom and Dad.
Sure we can,
Shining said, casting a spell that lifted Twilight off the floor by her tail.
Did you know that when Mom and Dad are out, I'm the one in charge?
But was as far as Twilight got before she was effortlessly levitated into the kitchen tail first. Shining snorted as he carried her along. He was definitely going to miss doing stuff like this when Twilight became too big for it.
What if it was a nefarious group of dragons that took Mom and Dad?
Twilight asked anxiously, continuing to ignore her dinner of steamed vegetables and eggplant lasagna, left ready to heat in the oven by their mother should Shining have to start dinner without them.
What if the dragons are flying off with them right as I'm saying this very sentence? What if the moment I finish this very sentence, Mom and Dad are dropped into an active volcano?
Even though Shining had covered every window in the kitchen to block out the storm, there was little he could do to stop the continuous blasts of thunder from reaching his sister's ears. It felt as if each time the storm sounded from outside, Twilight would come up with a new and even more far-fetched theory as to why their parents weren't home yet. Shining blamed the amount of books she read. Across the table, Shining chewed on his food and pointed a fork at her.
Why don't you concentrate on your dinner instead, Twilight? You know Mom and Dad would hate to hear how you missed dinner just because they weren't here.
You can eat at a time like this?
She asked him incredulously.
Shining, there are dragons on the loose!
I highly doubt that. I'm sure that would have made it into the morning papers.
With a visible amount of effort, Twilight lifted her small frame up onto the table.
Do you know something that I don't, Shining? You seem awfully calm about all this. Something to do with that group you're a member of, perhaps?
Group?
Shining asked before catching himself.
Oh, right, that group I told you about before. The very important group known as the,
Shining searched for the title he'd made up earlier, but found he'd forgotten it already.
Band of Best Brothers?
Twilight finished for him.
Don't play dumb, Shining. This is important business here. So, what does the Band of Best Brothers do in case of dragon attacks?
Shining shrugged.
You know, we just deal with it.
But how?
From underneath the table, Twilight had retrieved an extra notepad and crayon. If there was one thing Shining's sister liked more than books, it was taking notes. A lot of notes. Shining eyed up the kitchen until he found something useful. A flyer for an upcoming Wonderbolt show attached to the fridge. On it, two Pegasi were soaring towards each other, about to clink their hooves together.
Dragons? We give them the secret hoof claw shake, of course,
Shining told her coolly, leaning far back in his chair.
It's widely known that most disgruntled dragons are actually teenagers. And what do teenage creatures like best of all?
Twilight thought on that.
Black mane dye and acne cream?
Close,
Shining replied.
Actually, teenage dragons consider themselves bros above all else, and spend a great amount of time searching for other bros to be cool with. And the only way to tell if someone's a real bro? By our very own secret hoof claw shake.
So you're a bro?
Twilight asked him curiously.
Since when?
Since the day you were born, little sis. The first three letters of brother are bro, B-R-O, and I am part of the group of best brothers.
Band of Best Brothers?
Twilight corrected. Shining gave a nod.
Yes, of course. Only a test to see if you were paying attention. Nice job on all that.
Seated on the tablecloth, Twilight seemed to still be piecing it all together.
So, what you're saying is that dragons wouldn't attack Mom and Dad because you know a secret hoof claw shake that lets them know you're a real bro and not a fake bro?
More or less.
Shining felt so smug about his latest fib that he even plunked his back legs up onto the table.
Dragons don't say bros before rose for nothing, Twilight.
He then filled her in. Roses and rhodonite. It's a type of rock.
Mineral, Shining.
Twilight once again corrected. She still hadn't touched any of her food.
Still not hungry, Twilight?
Shining asked her.
You don't have to worry about dragons anymore, remember?
Twilight gave her dinner plate a disinterested glance.
I'm just not hungry right now. I'm still too worried about Mom and Dad being out in the storm.
Well,
Shining said, taking an exaggerated chomp out of his lasagna.
You do remember what Mom and Dad always said about dinner, right?
That it's promptly at 6 and wash your hands before eating.
Afraid not. Actually, it's that dinner is the most important meal of the day. Absolute.
Twilight rolled her eyes at him.
Okay, Shining, now I know you're lying. Most important meal of the day, that's breakfast. That's the most important meal of the day.
And who exactly told you that, dear sister?
Again, Shining took another large bite out of his food, hopeful to set a good example.
Mom and Dad? Or was it that weird cereal mascot you like so much that told you such lies?
Twilight opened her mouth to object, but instead leapt from her chair to retrieve her explosively colorful box of cereal from the cabinet. Then she set it back down on the table for closer inspection. Twilight's favorite breakfast cereal had always been one called Alicornios that had, you guessed it, a large pink alicorn made out of candy known as Princess Marshmallow serving as the mascot. Inside the box, one could be guaranteed sugary horn shapes, armor shapes, tiara shapes, cutie mark shapes, and best of all, hundreds upon hundreds of miniature marshmallow tails and manes. Twilight spun the box around to face the cartoon drawing of Princess Marshmallow. 2 large speech bubbles hung from her mouth.
I'm magically impossible. And remember, kids, breakfast is the absolute most important meal of the day. So make sure you eat breakfast 3 times a day, whether you want to or not.
Eventually, Twilight looked back up at Shining.
So breakfast isn't the most important meal of the day?
Shining gravely shook his head.
I think it's time you learn the truth. Since the very beginning of time, breakfast mascots have devoted their entire lives to spreading lies. Princess Marshmallow, Double Eye Pat Sailboat Captain, Tasty Treat, the fabulous Fiber Friends, all so they could gain as many bits as possible from naive breakfast enthusiasts.
So then what makes eating dinner so important?
Twilight asked. Shining hadn't thought that far ahead. He struggled for an answer.
For energy and other stuff like that.
Energy for what?
Twilight asked.
What do ponies even do besides sit around and sleep after they finish dinner?
Dream.
Shining replied at once, the idea hitting him like some bolt of lightning from a raging storm outside.
Ever heard of lucid dreaming before, Twilight?
Twilight nodded.
Of course I have. It's when you're dreaming and you realize you're dreaming and so you can control it. I love when that happens. Although it's only happened twice before. Like when I dreamt about flying in the clouds with no wings or finding a book that never ends and just keeps on going and going and going on.
And do you know what energizes lucid dreams?
Finally, she stared down at her untouched plate of food.
Dinner?
Exactly.
Despite her size, Twilight polished off her entire helping of food and accompanying glass of milk in a little over 20 seconds. Then she burped, and Shining laughed.
This is good garlic toast,
Twilight admitted, nibbling on the corner of one as crumb after crumb trickled from her mouth and onto the cushions below. Both her and Shining sat on the living room couch together, garlic toast in hoof, as they watched the dancing flames in the fireplace. It has always been a little bit of a tradition between them when their parents left for a time. Shining had never been all that keen in the cooking department, so garlic toast became his go-to dish. Twilight never seemed to mind, though, even if it always was a bit burnt around the edges. On the other end of the couch, Shining polished off his slice and sighed. Since they'd exited the kitchen, the rain outside had quieted, as did the rolling thunder. Even Twilight had quieted down a bit, perhaps due to the piece of garlic toast still stuffed inside of her maw. And then something creaked upstairs.
Zombies!
Twilight blurted out, showering the top of the coffee table with fresh breadcrumbs. Before Shining even knew what had happened, he found Twilight on his head, foreleg wrapped tight around his horn. He sighed bitterly as more crumbs fell onto his mane. Twilight continued on like a boiling tea kettle.
I knew it wasn't dragons or robots or ninjas or breakfast mascots. It was zombies all along. They got Mom and Dad on their way back home and now they're finally inside the house.
Again, Shining used his aura to lift Twilight up by the tail and back onto the couch. He clamped 2 heavy hooves atop her shoulders to make sure she stayed put.
Twilight, he began calmly, don't be ridiculous. You know perfectly well there's no such thing as zombies.
He paused, a smirk landing on his lips.
The trotting dead, on the other hoof.
Twilight's large eyes quickly only became black pupils.
Twilight, look, he started again. All kidding aside, there are no such things as zombies or trotting dead creatures.
You're just saying that because you know they'll eat me first,
Twilight said nervously.
My brain's much tastier than yours, probably bigger too.
Shining muttered out under his breath.
You are so lucky you're my kid sister right now.
Twilight jolted at something.
What was that?
What was what?
Another noise from upstairs.
Creaky floorboards.
Shining latched down on her shoulders again.
Look, Twilight, you're just going to have to trust me on this one. Even if there were zombies inside our house, which there aren't, I know precisely how to deal with them.
Twilight looked up at him, almost pleading.
You do? You really do?
Sure I do,
he told her rather bravely.
The best way of dealing with the recently deceased? Talk with them, of course.
Talking to them? Like, telling them how much you hate them or how much they smell so they'll get all sad and not want to be around you anymore?
And here I thought I was the bad guy for stealing sentient robots' umbrellas.
Shining thought dawdly before clarifying.
That more like reminding them how awesome it was back when they were alive. Reminding them all about hay burgers and water parks and fireworks and those super colorful swirly straws that restaurants put in fancy drinks that you can take back home after your meal.
Then what happens? After you tell them all that?
Well, they turn back to normal, of course, he said matter-of-factly. Truthfully, zombies are mostly misunderstood creatures. One lumped into a bad crowd a long time ago, but after you remind them how excellent it was to be alive, well, they cut out the whole brain-eating act in a jiffy.
Still under her brother's large hooves, Twilight's shakes abated as she scrunched up her face.
You're just making that up. Zombies don't work that way.
Says who? He rebutted. When was the last time you hung around a zombie and quizzed them on how they work?
Well, never, but when did you?
Shining patted her head twice.
Alas, dear sister, how is it you keep forgetting that I'm an official member of the Band of Big Brothers?
Band of Best Brothers?
She once again corrected.
Yes, of course, more tests, obviously.
What's the difference between a normal brother and a best brother anyway?
Shining turned to watch the fire again. For the moment, at least, Twilight seemed more interested in him than the dying storm outside.
Well, besides the collectible t-shirt and bi-monthly magazine subscription?
Yeah, besides that.
It sounded as if Twilight was still on the fence about Shining's made-up group.
Well,
Shining said, leaving the couch to pace around the room.
For starters, best brothers are far stronger than most average brothers. Ever wonder why I'm able to pick you up by the tail with just my horn? Best brother strength, right there.
So you trained to be that strong?
He held his head up high.
But of course.
So does Cadence help you train? Is that what you two are always doing in your room with the door shut?
Shining's face flushed, but he continued on after giving his head a quick shake.
Furthermore, all best brothers must take a pledge to always protect their parents as well as their
little sisters?
Twilight interrupted. Shining gave a nod.
Yes, I was just getting to that. And their little sisters as best they can. Unless they annoy them too much, of course, so I wouldn't go annoying any official members of the Band of Best Brothers, i.e. me, anytime soon.
Gotcha.
Twilight was still studying him rather closely, just waiting for the moment when he'd slip up and all of his big fibs would come crashing down around him.
Anything else I should know?
Shining tapped at his chin, pondering. And then he saw something out the rain-soaked window that gave him pause.
Yes, actually. And I can't believe I almost forgot. Each band of Big Brother members is gifted with 5 gifts. 5 to hoof out to others.
Like presents around the holidays?
No, more like,
He hesitated, searching for the correct word.
more like a boon.
What's a boon?
Twilight asked him. Shining smiled goofily.
And here I thought little Miss Sparklebutt here knew everything. That big, tasty brain of yours that zombies are always after and all.
Twilight growled deep in her throat.
Okay, so maybe I don't know everything, but I'm getting there, honest. Give me like 2 more weeks, tops.
Fine, Shining said. A boon is like a present, but it's not a material one. It's more like a favor. And considering I'm only allowed to give out 5 of them over a lifetime, they end up being much larger favors than most.
So it's like a wish?
Twilight asked with a hint of hopefulness in her voice.
Exactly so.
Shining took another glance out the window. He knew he had to act fast.
So, Twilight, if you could have one gigantic favor from your big brother right this second, what would it be?
That Mom and Dad would come home right this instant!
Twilight was so adamant about her request that she literally bounced up and down on the carpet in front of him. Shining merely closed his eyes and gave a nod. And then he clapped 2 hooves together.
Shining Armor, official member of the Band of Breast Brothers, hereby deems Twilight Sparkle's first official boon finished and paid in full.
Twilight looked first to the left, then to her right, finding no parents in sight. Her ears fell flat against her head.
But, Shining, you said...
Shining, Twilight? Sorry we took so long. We had to wait until the storm died down. You two have any dinner yet? Like a launched purple cannonball, Twilight flew toward her parents, catching her father in the gut and causing him to double over with a grunt. Regardless of her father's current condition, she remained latched onto him as if at any moment he'd randomly be sucked into a black hole or something like that.
Sorry, Dad,
Twilight said, her head buried into his chest.
I would have run into Mom first, but I thought she might still be sore from all this karate lessons.
Karate lessons? Questioned her mother, raising a sharp brow in Shining's direction, still standing in the living room, carefully off to the side.
Oh, right.
Like a zipper, Twilight dragged a hoof along her lips.
It's a secret. You two still want dinner? It's the most important meal of the day, after all. Unless the cereal mascots got to you while you were out. Did they? Those fabulous fiber friends always looked like trouble. Way too perky for ponies up so early. But, of course, they didn't get to you. You know karate.
Twilight's parents only stared at her in complete silence. She zipped her lips again.
Oh, that's also a secret, isn't it? The cereal mascots?
She turned to her brother.
Don't worry, Shining's a member of the Band of Best Brothers and can grant wishes if you ask him. Or did you already know about that?
Her father only took off his reins slicker and shrugged. You know what? Let's save that conversation for another day. It's been a long night already, so who's up for a nice warm mug of hot chocolate before bed? The family agreed collectively to do just that. Many years later. Shining Armor shot awake in the darkness of the night, his thoughts flying straight to Flurryheart. In his large bed, he sat up and turned to her crib, where not a single peep could be heard. He then turned to his wife and found her very much the same. He was momentarily puzzled, until he looked down and found the tip of his tail stuck in a sparkly aura. Based off its color, he whispered, "Twilight, are you in here?" Twilight lit her horn by the edge of the bed. She gave Shining's tail another playful tug.
I'm asking you for another favor, Shining.
He squinted at her, wiping the sleep from his eyes. One of what now?
I'm collecting my second boon.
Then it finally clicked. That still didn't mean Shining wanted to leave his overwhelmingly soft and warm bed, though. Turning onto his side, he yawned. I'll do whatever you want tomorrow, Twilight. Your friends are visiting all weekend, so maybe after breakfast. By the tip of his tail, Shining was roughly lifted from the bed. He was left to spin upside down in the air, glaring at his sister. I liked it a lot better when I was the one doing this to you. Less than 10 minutes later, Shining Armor's second boon had been finished and paid for in full, stacked on a plate and blackened around the edges. On a couch inside of her guest room, Shining sat beside his sister, a magically created fireplace roaring on the floor in front of them. You woke me up in the middle of the night just so I'd make you garlic toast?
Well, what's so wrong about that?
Twilight asked innocently, several crumbs stuck to her lips.
I felt like a snack.
The castle staff would have been happy to make you something if you'd asked. She smiled at him.
But no one burns bread quite like you do, big brother.
The pair were silent for a while, enjoying the magically flickering flames on the ground. Eventually, Shining chuckled. You do realize you wasted a perfectly good board of Best Brothers boon on a plate of garlic toast, right? Twilight quickly picked up another slice to munch on.
First off, Shining, it's banned of Best Brothers, and second, you're forgetting I still have 3 boons left. I waited this long for my second one, didn't I?
Still, Shining admitted quietly, not that much of a wish if you ask me.
Isn't it?
Twilight asked.
When was the last time we even did something like this? Sat by a fire and just spent time together eating something as simple as toast? Just you and I, brother and sister, no friends, no parents, no wife or baby or noble dignitary, just us.
Shining found he really had no good answer to that. Instead, he chose to focus on something else. Remember when we were kids and I was the one saying how I'd always be the one protecting you? Well, because I was a member of some made-up group, look how that turned out. Discord, Chrysalis, Nightmare Moon, Tirek, each and every one of them defeated by my little sister.
And what of all the things that you protected me from when we were kids?
Twilight asked earnestly.
Ninjas and overworked robots, hungry zombies and greedy breakfast mascots, dragons with a weird bro code?
Ugh. A small smile found Shining then. Sounds awfully ridiculous when you say it out loud like that. Twilight edged across the couch to rest her head on Shining's shoulder, same as she had done all those years ago.
All I'm saying is that maybe it's my turn to look after you. I mean, you do have Flurryheart to look after now.
Look after her how? By telling her lies I make up on the spot? Twilight shook her head.
No, just by making her feel better. Just by telling her what she needs to hear, no matter how silly it may sound. By telling her stories that she'll always hold on to and remember. And...
Shining turned to her.
And by giving her those 3 boons you still owe me.
She finished with a sigh.
I think right now, she needs them way more than I ever will. But I still got what I wanted, though. I still got my garlic toast. I still got my moment with my big brother. Him and I and nobody else. I think it should be Flurryheart's turn to have a few wishes to call her own.
You sure you want to give those away, Twilight? Just like that?
I am.
A comfortable pause followed that, and just when Shining thought that nothing would be said that night, Twilight told him in a faint whisper,
I think I hear the Grim Reaper prowling around downstairs, Shiny. I think he's searching for someone's soul to steal.
Shining wrapped a hoof around her shoulders to pull her close. That's an easy one. All you gotta do is take his cloak away when he's not looking.
Because it's the source of all of his power?
Nah, he's just left buck naked without it. Kinda puts a damper on the whole soul collecting thing once everyone's laughing at your bony butt. Twilight giggled, wrapping him up in a hug.
Never change, Shining. Never change.
He returned to the embrace. Wouldn't if I could. And as if precisely to spoil the tender moment with, Shining said, I gave Flurryheart a glass of water today.
Oh, okay. Why?
Because she was a little hoarse. Twilight took a moment.
How long have you been holding on to that?
Shining smiled. What feels like a lifetime.